Alright, how about oligopolies in practice? In this video, you'll learn how tacit collusion typically occurs in oligopolies and how oligopolist firms still find ways to compete with each other. Alright, so we have this word trust. Trust essentially merges companies into a single firm. We usually think of this as being around the turn of the 20th century. So the idea here, merge companies into single firms that can engage in monopoly pricing, even if they're not technically one single firm, they're under the control of one. So that was a common practice in that era. However, antitrust policy. So this is efforts by governments to prevent oligopolistic industries from becoming or behaving like monopolies. So again, remember, that is their goal in oligopoly. They would like to behave like a monopoly, but we have antitrust policy to stop them from doing that. So they're not allowed to make formal agreements on pricing, or there are huge penalties, including jail time for people that are found guilty of that, fines for the corporations, things like that. So tacit collusion is common. So again, remember, that's unspoken, where they essentially decide to charge similar prices for things. So that's common. However, there are a number of factors that limit their ability to actually coordinate high prices. So it's not as easy as we might think that there's some global conspiracy between rich companies or firms. Things that limit this ability is, well, first of all, if there are a large number of products that these firms are selling. So even though Walmart and Target dominate that kind of industry, they each sell thousands of different products, and so it can be difficult to know what the competitor is charging for every single one of those products. They also have different products, so they're not exactly the same. So there can be complex products and pricing schemes where they might have, they charge different prices, they do different sizes, different sales, things like that. Difference in the interests of those two companies, as well as the bargaining power of the buyers. So maybe Walmart's located where there's no one else that they're competing with, but Target has to compete with other stores still, or vice versa. So this can be very difficult because it's not as simple as being like, all right, what's Walmart charging? We're going to charge exactly that. That doesn't actually work. So what happens if they start competing? This is price competition gone really badly for the company. So you might have a price war break out. This occurs when tacit collusion breaks down. So they were agreeing tacitly without saying so, but they were charging the same price. And now that collusion breaks down, and aggressive price competition causes prices to collapse. So price war, obviously these firms want to avoid that, but that can be the result when tacit collusion breaks down. All right, so what are some things that other ways for them to compete then, because they don't want to engage in a price war? So one way is to try to differentiate their products. So Coke and Pepsi. To me, Coke and Pepsi are not perfect substitutes. I think Coke is far superior to Pepsi, and I don't really drink Pepsi very often unless I feel like I don't have any other good choice, but I'm not happy about it. If you offer me Coke or Pepsi, even if the Coke is a little bit more expensive, I'm going to get Coke because that's the one that I like. I think Pepsi is flat Coke, so I don't want it. So one thing that you do is you try to convince buyers that your product is different from the products of the other firms in the industry. So for example, vodka, which is supposed to be tasteless and should not matter which company it's made by. You have something like Grey Goose, which their marketing people, they put it in this beautiful bottle and they try to convince us that it's French and it's better and all this, but vodka is supposed to be tasteless. So it shouldn't theoretically matter whether it's Grey Goose or a much cheaper vodka. Apple, Honda, they have their competitors and they do make their products different. This is one way that they compete. So they're not competing by price, Apple versus Samsung. They're not trying to make their prices lower, but they're trying to compete by having the better phone or the brand loyalty, that sort of thing. Another thing is price leadership. This is where one firm would set its price first and then the other firms follow. And typically this would be the larger firm would be the one to set their price and then the others would copy it. So this example of GM, Ford, and Chrysler, it's a little outdated, but in the 1950s, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, this was an oligopoly, American cars in the United States. GM would set their prices and Ford would follow right behind. They'd make a very similar price to GM, and then Chrysler would make this similar price to Ford and GM. So they just kind of follow. Again, there's nothing illegal about that as long as they aren't overtly discussing that. But so price leadership, another way that they can do this. Non-price competition. Firms with a tacit understanding the tacit understanding is not to compete on price. They will use advertising and other means. We just talked about this a couple of slides ago, such as adding new features to try to increase their sales. So this is where they try to make their product better. Or, Pepsi, they do their advertising and they have, usually they have pop stars, young people on their commercials trying to show, endorse their product. Whatever the case is, they're not competing via price, but they are still competing, trying to convince people that their product is better or actually make their product better. This has been a LaMoney production.